Ahead of the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting scheduled to take place here in Kigali come June 2021, I have the pleasure to be joined in studio by Lord Tariq Ahmad of Wimbledon, the UK Minister of State for the Commonwealth. Welcome to Kigali and thank you so much for joining us.
Pleasure to be with you.
Your visit to Rwanda is, among other things, aimed at assessing Rwanda's preparedness for the CHOGM meeting. What have you found on ground so far?
Well, I think they often say that the strength of hosting anything is in its people, and the warmth of the reception I've received from the people of Rwanda, the engagements I've had, demonstrate the real motivation, the enthusiasm to host the Heads of Government meeting. In practical terms, we've had some very productive meetings with the government of Rwanda in terms of the transition from our role as chair in office to Rwanda's after CHOGM 2021. And this morning at the Kigali Conference Centre, I saw the actual physical sort of venue where CHOGM would be held. And I think it's very much full steam ahead. Rwanda seems very much prepared and ready to go.
Absolutely. CHOGM was postponed last year, and truth be told, some of the key Commonwealth member states are currently going through a crisis, a second wave of COVID-19 infections, such as India. Can you confirm to us that this is happening?
Well, first of all, on the COVID-19 issue and the challenge, it demonstrated the strength of the Commonwealth. Some of your viewers may know that as chair in office, we worked with the Secretariat in issuing a communique on how Commonwealth countries could work together as we face the challenge. As our Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, has said, we got into it together and we will only come out of it together. In terms of the decision of last year, it was the right decision as the pandemic was gripped to postpone CHOGM, but very much the preparations is for the CHOGM to take place as scheduled. But ultimately, it will be a decision for the government of Rwanda.
And should it go ahead and happen in June, what would be the impact of it happening amid some of the key members being under lockdown?
Well, I think, first of all, it's important to start at home. We went through a really severe test of our own resilience, a resilience of our people. As you will know, our own Prime Minister was impacted quite severely by the COVID-19 virus. And we've come through it. There's been lessons learnt. It's been evolving. And I think we've been sharing the lessons of different lockdowns. You mentioned India in your earlier remarks. We stand very much firmly with India, and I'm sure I speak for Rwanda and indeed the whole Commonwealth family that our thoughts and prayers are with India at the moment as they go through a real challenge. The number of deaths, what we're seeing on our screens, the infections which are spreading. And what we've seen is a real global response to the needs and requirements of India, including from the United Kingdom, where on the requirements of oxygen, the requirements that are acute to India have been met. In terms of your specific question about events going ahead within the context of the pandemic, what I can certainly speak to is the experience of the United Kingdom. We are currently chairs of the G7. We are also hosts of the COP26 in November, and certainly we are preparing for both events in physical presence, and we're doing so whilst respecting whatever COVID restrictions may need to apply at that time.
When you say while respecting COVID-19 guidelines, that might include having virtual conferences or seminars. Are you looking to having such options when it comes to the CHOGM meeting in June?
Well, I think, just again to be clear, I think how the CHOGM is organized in terms of the format it takes, the physical against virtual, as you're suggesting, that ultimately is very much a decision for Rwanda. What I can assure you of, whatever decision and how the CHOGM is moved forward by Rwanda, as I said to President Kagame directly, we stand shoulder to shoulder with Rwanda and are very supportive. The reason of me being here is, as you rightly said, to look at the preparations, to work with our friends within the Rwandan government to ensure there's a smooth transition. And indeed, from what I've seen in terms of policy, program and preparations, as I said earlier, it's full steam ahead at the moment.
Does this agreement also extend to other member states? Is there a general consensus about what needs to be done when it comes to CHOGM?
Well, I think what the Commonwealth does do, and through the Secretariat, is ensure that members' views are reflected within the Commonwealth family. And I'm sure as we build towards June, we will be engaging with Commonwealth members, we being the United Kingdom as the current chair in office, Rwanda as the hosts of CHOGM, and indeed the Secretary General and her team, in ensuring that the CHOGM that is held is safe and secure, but also fulfills the real mandate which is required of bringing the Commonwealth 54 members together in terms of the nature and how that is organized. Ultimately, as I said, it will be a decision for the Rwandan government, but I know I can speak for all Commonwealth member states that we stand very much with Rwanda, and the fact everyone across the Commonwealth, I think, is very much looking forward to CHOGM for what it does. And on the international point, more generally, I think we've all got used to, whether we're traveling, the tests we need to take, the precautions we need to undertake when you're sitting on the plane, you're traveling to another country, respecting the COVID-19 parameters and rules and regulations. And I think we've all learned to live with that over the last year.
Given that the biggest number of member states are in Africa, and yet the continent is still lagging behind when it comes to COVID-19 vaccination rollout, what are the strategies that the Commonwealth, as a group of nations, is doing to ensure that vaccines are distributed across the continent and across all the member states?
Well, first of all, from a United Kingdom's perspective, I already mentioned the COVID-19 statements on how we can work together. And the Commonwealth countries are very supportive of the COVAX facility, which has been organised through the World Health Organization. Indeed, the United Kingdom, we've spent and already donated £548 million to ensuring the equitable and fair access to the COVID-19 vaccine. You mentioned Africa. I think what's heartening to see across the globe, including in Africa, we've seen the initial tranches of the vaccines now reaching different populations across the continent, and we do hope that will continue. However, there is a fact that one of the major contributors to the vaccine rollout, including through COVAX, is India. And of course, we've seen the challenges that India is currently facing. But I think what it underlines is a real sense of togetherness, that the world community, if anything, what we've seen through the COVID-19 pandemic is the lesson, or the greatest lesson learned, I would certainly argue, is how we need to collaborate more, how we need to work together more. And we've seen through the COVID-19 response that that's exactly how the global community, including the Commonwealth family, are acting.
The Commonwealth has been criticized to be a club of countries with little influence and whose impact on the lives of the common people is minimal. I mean, the common people would want access to education, access to health. But why should a common person, for instance, in rural Rwanda or rural Botswana, care about or want to be taking a keen interest in the Commonwealth projects?
Well, first of all, I would say the premise of your question is, does it impact the Commonwealth and what it means? What is the Commonwealth all about? It's about our shared values. It's about the things that define us, what brings us together. We share common systems, whether it's in terms of education, the value system, strengthening democracies, looking at strengthening human rights. Equally, how can we sort of really leverage the Commonwealth advantage when it comes to issues of trade. And on all these areas, we've seen progress. There's been some genuine investments. I'll give you one practical example, if I may. The United Kingdom has been at the forefront of ensuring that every single girl around the globe, it's our Prime Minister's passion, that every girl gets 12 years of quality education. That's the theme that has been very much connecting the Commonwealth, that every girl throughout the Commonwealth has the opportunity to get 12 years of quality education. And you ask about how's it impacted direct lives. £200 million has been spent specifically in Commonwealth countries for that very objective. And that's just one area. We can talk about the major challenges, COVID-19 we've touched on, the environment, climate change, the Commonwealth through the Clean Oceans Alliance, the investments of hubs to share technical ability, the ability of acting together to meet the challenges of climate change underlines how, as a Commonwealth family, we are acting. So I would argue, on the contrary, the Commonwealth does matter. And perhaps they say it does what it's on the tin. It takes the wealth to the common and the common into the wealth.
Perhaps because we still see issues such as what the Commonwealth is fighting, such as domestic violence, lack of access to education, lack of access to proper health care. Perhaps that's why they might feel that way, especially in African countries.
Well, I think, again, I've touched on the education point. And I totally accept, I think there's many parts of the world, including in Africa, where children, and girls in particular, don't have the opportunity. And that's why you need institutions, organizations like the Commonwealth family that identifies how we can act together. Countries are in different parts of their own development, but equally committing ourselves to ensure that we lift the lives and the opportunities for everyone. If we look at the specific example here in Rwanda, Rwanda is a Commonwealth partner. Since 1998 to date, we've invested over £1 billion in helping rebuild reinvigorated a progressive Rwanda, and we're very proud of that. That's lifted people out of poverty. It's provided opportunity for girls in education, and that's a very practical bilateral example of how two members of the Commonwealth are working together. And I think it's through shared experiences of how we learn from each other that is really the underlying strength of the Commonwealth.
Absolutely. One of the core common values of the Commonwealth is justice and accountability, and that is shared across the Commonwealth family. And many Rwandans, especially genocide survivors, continue to wonder when the UK will take action in regards to the 5 genocide suspects in the UK. What can you tell these Rwandans?
Well, first of all, we stand in total solidarity. One of my roles within the British government is as the Prime Minister's Special Representative on preventing sexual violence in conflict. I've met with victims of sexual violence in conflict, and when we look back at the genocide that took place here in Rwanda, I was at to pay my respects to the victims of the genocide only yesterday with our High Commissioner. And when I went there and I stood by the memorial, I stood by the very place where some of those tragic victims are buried. You can't help but be moved by the tragedy that unfolded here. Yet here we are, 27 years on, and Rwanda has moved forward. We've seen progress on the very issues of justice and accountability, which you mentioned. And in this regard, again, we stand very strongly with Rwanda. On the specific question you raised about the 5 individuals, what I can share with your viewers is that our Metropolitan Police have a specialist unit looking at war crimes and war criminals, and they're very much engaged on this very agenda. We want to see every perpetrator of every crime being brought to justice, and we share that with
Absolutely. Rwanda has definitely moved on, but it still seeks justice for the crimes that were committed back in 1994. And very recently, the House of Lords formed the APRG committee. May I ask why now, after all these years?
Well, I think, first of all, I'd say from a British perspective, and I'm sure there will be many Rwandans who will agree with this premise, that we've been shoulder to shoulder with Rwanda. And I've already indicated the strength of our bilateral relationship. And whilst I've been here talking about the Commonwealth, we've talked about other opportunities as well, how we can strengthen both in terms of development, but also trade. I think there's huge opportunities. We talked about climate, for example, scope to develop capacity in electric vehicles. Now that's for the future, and we're working on that. On the issue of why now, I would argue that's not the case. We've been very much seized about ensuring that the perpetrators of this genocide are brought to justice, and we will do everything we can in ensuring justice prevails, and in doing so, that ultimately the survivors are put at the heart of finding the solutions to this. Now, reconciliation is often a word used when we talk about conflict, and we really need to reflect on that. Maybe I can share some personal reflections. You know, I'm the son of someone who went through the partition of India, the challenges of families turning on families, the challenges of lives lost, innocent, tragic victims of a conflict. We need to learn from the lessons of human history, and we hope, as Rwanda has shown, and as the memorial that I visited yesterday also demonstrates, the tragedy of how one human being can turn in this most tragic way, in this most inhumane way on their fellow human beings. And I assure you of this, whether it's through the British Parliament, as we've done in many years, not just through the formation of this APPG, but through the direct government support we've given. We will work together with Rwanda as a partner, as a friend, to ensure the perpetrators of these crimes are brought to justice.
We now do take a short break, but we will be back shortly with more questions for Lord Ahmed Tariq. Welcome back. Still in conversation with Lord Ahmed Tariq. Welcome back from the short break. Well, the next big thing is the Glasgow Climate Change Conference in November 2021. What are your expectations from the Commonwealth in the build-up of this summit?
Well, first of all, the preparations have been intense. We've been working over the course of the last 12 months and beyond. And like Rwanda, when it came to CHOGM, we had to take the difficult decision to postpone the COP26. But we're full speed ahead in terms of our planning. And we've been investing a lot of time, including within the context of our Commonwealth partners, to ensure nationally determined contributions. The ambition we're setting is high. When we look at the challenges of climate change, we talked earlier of COVID-19. Arguably, the two biggest challenges we're facing is on the health side with COVID-19 and the pandemic, and on the challenges of climate change. Now, there's a common factor between them, that we can only resolve them, we can only solve them if we work together. And the Commonwealth has a very important role. And in the context of some of the discussions that have taken place yesterday in terms of the planning for CHOGM, we want to ensure that the focus that the Rwandan government is bringing on the importance of climate change and ensuring that we as a Commonwealth act together, that we can take the learnings and the decisions that are taken at CHOGM and make sure they translate directly into a Commonwealth deliverable during COP26 as well. There's a lot of planning going on. There is a lot of discussions. There has been a lot of meetings. I know various meetings in which President Kagame has also been involved directly in terms of the ambition we're setting. I think it underlines the importance that whether it's the United Kingdom or Rwanda or any other member of the 54 Commonwealth family, you could be a small island developing state or you could be a developed state within the Commonwealth. Ultimately, though, climate change, like COVID-19, knows no barriers. It impacts us all. Therefore, we need collaborative action. So whether it's through NDCs, through the actions we're taking on the Clean Ocean Alliance, cleaning up plastics in our oceans, whether it's the replanting of natural deterrents such as mangroves, we're learning and providing support to each member of the Commonwealth through various support we can provide. The other important issue is about climate finance, the ability to access finance. In this regard, back in 2019, our Prime Minister Boris Johnson made a specific pledge, which we've again emphasised stands today, of an additional £11.6 billion for climate finance for everyone. Now, that does mean that if you're a small state within the Commonwealth, such as Vanuatu, you may not have the technical ability to be able to access that finance. So one area of our focus over the last few months has also been on identifying, through our discussions with fellow Commonwealth partners, what are the barriers they find to finance? How can we overcome those barriers and ensure the practicalities of accessing that finance is made available to every Commonwealth member as well?
On that, I would want to give a follow-up question. How can the climate change agenda be institutionalized within the Commonwealth member states?
Well, it already is. We have the Blue Oceans Charter, for example. How can we have cleaner oceans? I've talked about the alliance we have with Vanuatu about cleaning up plastics within our oceans. And I think we've seen both bilaterally with countries working together, but individually, but also collectively as the Commonwealth, a real commitment on ensuring that we support each other. If I may, I'll share with you another practical example. When I was first appointed Minister of State at what was the Foreign and Commonwealth Office before we merged together with our colleagues in DFID, one of my first experiences, I'm Minister for the Caribbean and the Overseas Territories, and Hurricane Irma and Maria struck. And when I visited the devastation I saw in the Caribbean, what was really heartening was to see the learnings of that within the strength of the Commonwealth and the response of how each country was helping each other, how each territory was standing up its own expertise. And I think that's the real strength and resolve. And that's what's very much integrated within the Commonwealth, how we come together on ensuring those learnings and experiences can be translated. Because we never know how Mother Nature may act. Somewhere in the world, some will be impacted by the issues of climate change. It may be a hurricane or it may be something else. We need to ensure that we invest in mitigation. We're doing just that. We need to ensure we invest in adaptability. We're doing just that. And for that, you need accessibility to climate finance. And as I said already, we're doing just that as well.
Some may actually argue that it is too late to tackle climate change. What do you think?
One should never give up hope. It's never too late. If there was one learning amongst all the other wonderful things my parents taught me, is never say never. If you believe in something, have faith, act on principle, and make it happen.
Absolutely. One other common goal of the Commonwealth is the youth and the young people, and 60% of the Commonwealth population is under the age of 30. What is being done to mainstream youth priorities into the levels of decision making and leading up to sustainable development as well?
Well, first and foremost, I think I would do it because I include myself in that cohort. Let's have a shout out for the over 30s as well. And they have a big role to play. A lot of the ministers are over 30.
Yeah.
And the decision making is within the hands of the over 30s. But we were all young once. I think first and foremost, we've seen an incredible enthusiasm amongst the youth of the Commonwealth, 1.4 billion people, who are really engaged on the agenda, the issues we've talked about, both in terms of health, but particularly climate change. It's really owned by the youth in terms of what they wish to see, and rightly so. This is about protecting their planet. I've got 3 children. I want to ensure the kind of joys I've felt with green forests, the clean oceans, is not just protected and sustained, but strengthened. And that's why we need that level of youth engagement. In practical terms, what are we doing? There is a youth forum, which will be very much part of the lead up to the Heads of Government meeting. We had a very successful youth forum in London. There's also one of the areas, a practical one, and it is for, of course, the Rwandan government to suggest it, but it worked for us. We ensured that every official delegate, as part of every government delegation, there was at least one individual who was under 30. Now, that's a very practical step you can take to ensure the views of the youth, the aspirations of the youth are reflected in government policy. And I think it is an agenda which is very much owned by the youth. And therefore, the Youth Forum will have a direct feed into the discussions by the heads of government. But I think if you look at the United Kingdom, you look at Rwanda, or you look across the Commonwealth, everywhere I've visited, although the last year has been somewhat limited because of the challenges we've had, every time, as I've done today at the university where we had lots of questions, what I saw was a real interest. Actually, it was more than that. It was a real vigor and enthusiasm for being involved in policy making, decision making, but contributing to that. And it is important that we who have positions of responsibility in government not just engage with the youth. It's a very easy thing to say. We listen, we learn, and then we apply.
Lord Ahmed Tariq of Wimbledon, it's been a real pleasure to speak to you today.
The pleasure's been mine. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. That was all we had for you in conversation with Lord Ahmed Tariq, the UK State Minister in charge of Commonwealth, who is on a 2-day visit in Rwanda to assess the preparedness of Rwanda ahead of the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting. Thank you so much for joining us.